Pozdravljeni in dobrodošli vsi, ki v srcu dobro mislimo. Hvala lepa, ker ste prišli na našo na hitro sklicano tiskovno konferenco na današnjo lepo sončno soboto. Tržnica je že opravljena, verjamem, če ne pa vas kakšna solata še pričaka tudi potem, ker danes ne bomo dolgi. Zbrali smo se zato, da vas še enkrat povabimo na dve predavanji, dve srečanji z doktorjem Mattiasom Desmetom, ki ga prav lepo pozdravljam. Welcome, Mattias, and we are very happy that we have you among us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here.
To povabilo, zaslužen za to povabilo je pravzaprav naš sodelavec, zdaj te že lahko tako imenujem, Tim Butera, ki je po branju te knjige in potem, ko je spoznaval delo Mattiasa Desmeta, ugotovil oziroma si zaželel, da bi ga povabili v Slovenijo in da bi se z njim lahko v živo srečali in pogovarjali. In zaradi Timove vztrajnosti, veselja in trme se je to tudi zgodilo, za kar se mu v imenu založbe in v imenu združenja Povezani smo prav lepo zahvaljujem. Kajti založba Sanje, ki je lani izdala knjigo Psihologija totalitarizma Mattiasa Desmeta, letos je šel po natis in za novinarje knjiga, recenzijski izvodi so na voljo tukaj v naši knjigarni. Smo se odločili, da bi bilo res dobro, da o teh temah in tudi o drugih temah spregovorimo skupaj v živo. Kaj je totalitarizem, zgodovinsko gledano, nekako vsi vemo ali pa vsaj mislimo, da vemo. Kako se pa kaže v današnji, na videz zelo demokratični družbi, pa je seveda drugo vprašanje, na katero je Mattias v svoji knjigi podal kar nekaj tehtnih odgovorov in nas soočil s tem, da pravzaprav bolj sanjamo to, da živimo v demokraciji, kot pa, da se nam to dejansko dogaja. Ta privid demokracije je lahek, je udoben, zelo nam je všeč, če se nam ni treba ukvarjati z neprijetnimi vprašanji, vendar pa smo predvsem v zadnjih letih med covidom in po covidu priča vedno večji cenzuri, ne samo na področju zdravstva, ampak tudi na področju drugih tematik in vsakogar, ki si drzne razmišljati drugače in ki si drzne to razmišljanje tudi javno povedati, ga zapisati, objaviti, kaj hitro doleti oznaka teoretika zarote, če še nekaj hujšega, doleti ga utišanje in lahko se mu zgodi, da se mu večina posmehuje. Torej, to so nekatere od tem, ki se bodo prav gotovo zbistrile v današnjem in jutrišnjem predavanju. Zdajle pa je seveda Mattias na voljo novinarjem za vprašanja in za odgovore. Najprej pa ga bom prosila za kratko predstavitev tematike, o kateri bo govoril danes in jutri. So, first question for warming up. It's your first time in Ljubljana. What's your impression so far? You arrived yesterday evening, so
I arrived yesterday evening.
There's not a lot of impressions to
As
share.
soon as my plane hit the ground, I liked it. So it's one of the most beautiful airports I have ever seen, I think. Surrounded by the mountains, it's wonderful. And of course the weather is beautiful. That's also helpful. But I like it very much, and I hope to explore it further. Yes.
Yeah, I think you people from Belgium and Dutch who are not familiar with high mountains, this impression of our Alps that you see from the plane could be quite magnificent for you.
It's magnificent. Yes, the wild nature of the Alps in combination with like the soft landscape around it is beautiful. It's wonderful. Yes, it's a very nice contrast.
So I would say this will be very short stay, just for 2 days. You're welcome to visit us again.
Thank you. It's a nice prospect. Yeah.
And I would like you to shortly present, to give us a short summary of what your lecture will be today and tomorrow. Today we will be in Sanje and tomorrow in Ljubljana at Kino Šiška, so that people can get their first impression of what they can expect or what to look forward to.
it's always dangerous to ask me to give a short answer. I'm famous for my long answers. One time on the reading, so the interviewer asked me one question and I continued for 1 hour and a half answering the question.
Wow.
So I like to give long answers, but I will try to put it in a nutshell. Well, I will talk about totalitarianism, of course, but maybe not exactly in the way most people expect it. Like when people talk about totalitarianism, they usually focus on the totalitarian system, the totalitarian regime itself. And that's of course something important. It's important to understand the totalitarian regime, and I do believe that we are witnessing now the emergence of a new totalitarian system. I truly do. It's not the fascist totalitarianism of the first half of the 20th century, also not the communist totalitarianism of the first half of the 20th century. It's what people like Joost Meerlo called velvet glove totalitarianism, a totalitarianism which you do not really feel, but which is very much totalitarianism and which will in the end also have an iron fist in the velvet glove. And so it's more what I would call a technocratic totalitarianism, which Hannah Arendt anticipated in 1952, for instance. She said, we've seen the decline and fall of the fascist totalitarianism, and we soon will be witness to the fall of communist totalitarianism, but very soon we'll see the emergence of a new totalitarianism, and this new totalitarianism will not be led by gang leaders such as Stalin and Hitler. It will be led by dull bureaucrats and technocrats. And I think that's what we are facing now. We see how the upper layers of society are more and more convinced that the challenges we face cannot be solved by a democratic system, that we need a technocratic system in which technocratic experts are in charge. We see how behind the screens, like everything is prepared for such a totalitarian system. We see how the technology for digital IDs, digital coins, and so on, 5 minutes in 5 minute cities is slowly prepared. Which and I guess that the system, intentionally or not, just waits for the right psychological conditions in the population to implement that system. And that's what I noticed in the beginning of the corona crisis. Like, I have been studying the psychological phenomena behind totalitarian systems. I will go in and I will talk about these in detail because that's the most important thing. You need to understand the psychology of totalitarianism in order to know what you can do against a totalitarian system. So that's just crucial. If you try to deal with a totalitarian system, as you do, you would do in a classical dictatorship, you go completely in the wrong direction. The totalitarian system is something completely different than a classical dictatorship, and the resistance against the totalitarian system is of a completely different nature. And so that's why it's so important to understand the psychological mechanisms behind the emergence of totalitarianism. And that's what I noticed. I've been studying the psychological processes behind it, which are all related to the phenomenon of mass formation, I think for more than 12 years now. But from 2017 onwards, I intensified my investigation of these phenomena. Suddenly in 2020, the corona crisis started. And immediately, from the first week onwards, I wrote my first opinion paper about, which was titled, "The fear for the virus is more dangerous than the virus itself." And I tried to warn the people that what emerged in the population was the fundamental process that leads to totalitarianism. The global institutions prepared already for a long time for a totalitarian system, or at least for a technocratic system. For a long time, they believe already that we need much more impact of experts on policy, and that we should limit the democratic possibilities to go against all kinds of global policies. But what was new in the corona crisis was that in the population we could clearly see that exactly these processes started to emerge, which led to the emergence of the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. And these processes actually or the processes of mass formation. That means a certain part of the population, usually not much more than 20 to 30%, that starts to go along blindly with a narrative, an ideology that is distributed in the mass media. That's where I will be talking about.
But this is based on the fact that science became a new religion, that rationalistic, materialistic narrative became a new religion, and ration just came in the place of God, let's say. Before
yes.
we have God and we have faith in God and religion, and now we have scientific religion, and we have to be believers. We are told to believe everything without any doubt.
Yes, I agree that science replaced religion as the metaphysical authority in society. But it didn't become a religion. It is much worse than that. And that's exactly what I did from the beginning. From my first opinion paper until now, I always try to show people the broader cultural, psychological processes that lead to the emergence of totalitarianism. And indeed, the root cause of the symptom of the plague of totalitarianism is our rationalist view on man in the world, I believe. And a rationalist view on man in the world, for me, to be clear, is something different than being rational. Mm-hmm. Because you can be very rational without being rationalist. Rationalist is an attitude in which you believe that the ultimate questions of life can be answered in a rational way. And that's completely against science, actually. That's a strange thing, because all major scientists really stressed that ultimately the essence of the phenomena in nature, the essence of life around us, can never be reduced to a rational category. That's exactly what people like Niels Bohr and Heisenberg tried to convey in the first half of the 20th century, but in the second half of the 20th century, when complex dynamical systems started in the sciences, it was really the core of this theory. Complex dynamical systems theory showed us, and I explained that in the third part of my book somewhere, I think, complex dynamical systems theory showed us exactly this, that every complex dynamical system in nature behaves literally like an irrational number and is intrinsically unpredictable. So science showed us that, okay, a certain part of reality can be understood in a rational way, or is isomorphic with rational categories, but the essence always transcends rationality. And rationalists forget exactly this. A rationalist view of man in the world believes that rational knowledge is the highest kind of knowledge a human can gather, and that both individual life and human living together in general, society, should be organized on the basis of rational knowledge. And that's a fatal mistake. That's the fatal mistake of the Enlightenment tradition. We had to go, I believe that we had to go through this phase of rationalism as a humanity. But now it's time to leave it behind and to start to understand that there is something that transcends rational knowledge. And that something that transcends rational knowledge is something much more of the order of resonance, is resonating knowledge. It's what Einstein called Einfühlung, a kind of empathic knowledge. Einstein said, many people think that science originated from a supreme capacity to think rationally. I do not agree, he said. All major scientific discoveries started from a capacity for Einfühlung, for empathic understanding. And he stressed, I will now I will keep the rest for the lecture.
A lot of this is already written in your book, so for the ones who didn't, tisti, ki še niste prebrali, jo toplo priporočam. I just want to touch another topic, and then I will leave the journalists to ask questions. In your invitation announcement to your lecture, you emphasize speaking of truth. And I would like to ask you, did you mean on individual level or in collective level as a society? How, in what way can we approach this truth? How to speak it, how to listen, how to hear it for the beginning? And what is the truth in our times where there are so many different truth in plural?
Well,
which one to believe?
yes, my next book is all about that. It's about the psychology. It's about the psychology of truth, and we shouldn't think naive about truth. Naive thinking about truth has led to much problems in
What is
this
the
world.
naive thinking about
It's
truth?
just thinking that truth has to do with a kind of discourse that refers in a correct way to facts.
Okay.
And that you can possess truth. People who think in a factual way about truth think that they can possess truth. And I believe that as soon as you believe that you possess the truth, you already lost it completely. So truth is something that you can feel for a moment, that you can resonate with, and towards which you can take the responsibility of articulating it. And it's always riskful to articulate the truth. That's a phenomenological characteristic of truth speech. It's always riskful, and you feel it. You feel that that at a certain moment, you can make a choice to say something, to articulate words that go through what I often call the veil of appearances.
Yes.
And you feel that almost physically. You feel like, okay, if I say this, I know it's true, but people will be angry with me. Or at least that's how I feel. It feels sincere to me to say this, but people will be angry with me. Look at what the ancient Greeks told about truth speech. They called it parrhesia very often, bold speech, parrhesia. They said it's always riskful. And the one who tries to do it in society does the best thing he can do for society, but he might be killed. And I will, in my next book, I will provide like a psychological theory about what truth speech is. Just to avoid, I believe that truth speech, for instance, is the only remedy for totalitarianism, and even for imperialism. But that's something else. But Mahatma Gandhi, for instance, realized that very well. He realized that the only resistance against an imperialistic or totalitarian, or no matter what, fully fledged bureaucratic system is sincere speech, is truth speech. And it's actually from several perspectives. You can see that very clearly. Like what our society, the real disease of our society, is exactly that it lost touch with sincerity. And that's a strange thing. Like in the beginning, when the rationalist view on man and the world emerged and became dominant after the French Revolution, people were under the illusion that finally they would get rid of all these false narratives of religion, of mythical views on man and the world, and so on, and that finally society would be led on the basis of real knowledge of truth. And exactly the opposite happened. Immediately after the French Revolution, the first institutes for modern propaganda emerged, because the leaders became convinced that they couldn't impose their will anymore in an overtrade to the population, and hence they had to make the population do what they wanted them to do without the population knowing that they did what the leaders wanted them to do. And so lying became an art and a discipline. And that's what people have always lied. People have always lied. But since the French Revolution, the act of lying became institutionalized, based on academic research, and ideologically justified. After the French Revolution, the leaders, and it's not just something that I invent. Read all the works of the founding fathers of modern propaganda and public relations, such as Lippmann, Trotter, Bernays, and they all stress the same. Since the fall of the Ancien Régime during the French Revolution, leaders cannot impose their will anymore, just like that, to the population. So if we do not want to fall prey to the irrationality and the destructiveness of the population, we will have to find a solution to that. we will have to become real leaders again, and the only way to become leaders again is to make the population do what we want without them knowing that they do what they want. So that was the birth of modern propaganda, and now propaganda became always more important. Until now we live in a world in which propaganda is everywhere, without us realizing it. A search engine such as Google is a propaganda tool, and the best you can imagine. It's the best propaganda tool you can imagine, and that is also developed with the grant of the State Department in America, which knew the value and the power of search engines as propaganda tools. So that was the problem. The rationalist view on man and the world believed that finally society would be led on the basis of truth and real knowledge, and it went in exactly the opposite direction. Exactly the opposite happened. Society lost touch with truth speech, and hence it's clear, I think, that the only real remedy for a society which is sick of propaganda is sincerity, and that's what we have to reinvent and reappreciate again, slowly, step by step, as a humanity. We have to rediscover, reinvent, reappreciate what sincerity means for a human being, and it's very profound. The one who neglects articulating the words that seem sincere and honest, without being under the illusion that he is the only one who knows the truth, no. If you just, from time to time, do not take the risk of articulating what, according to you, is true and is sincere, then you slowly, literally, lose your soul. Your ego becomes stronger, your identification with your outer ideal image becomes stronger, but the ego inside of you, literally, the psychological energy that vibrates inside of your embodied soul, becomes weaker and weaker and weaker, and you get alienated from yourself. So, I don't know anymore what your question was, but...
Okay. It was about the truth, and I think you answered it very well.
Okay.
Sincerely, thank you. Zdaj bi pa prosila, če so kakšna vprašanja, da kar na plano z njimi. In seveda je Mattias na voljo potem tudi za pogovore na 4 oči oziroma na 1-1 s tistimi, ki mu želite zastaviti kakšno vprašanje in se z njim pogovoriti. Še enkrat vabljeni danes v Celje, v Celjski dom in jutri v Kino Šiška v Ljubljani. Lahko pridete obakrat. V drugih mestih nas pa tokrat ne bo. Bomo pa kdaj drugič. Torej, če so kakšna vprašanja, izvolite, sicer pa potem prepuščam Mattiasa vam, da se z njim pogovorite sami. So, as I imagined, there are no public questions. I'll just ask if someone would like to pose a question now, but they would like to talk to you individually.
Okay.
Now, 2 questions are prepared there. Mr. Dobrin prepared it for Mattias.
Okay, I will read.
Who prepared it?
Mr. Dobrin.
Okay.
Okay, the first question is...
You will read questions yourself and then answer it?
Yes.
Okay, good. I can rest.
Until people understand what cognitive dissonance is and perhaps recognize themselves in it, they will continue to believe in conspiracy theories. Could you please simply explain this phenomenon for them and add at least 2 examples of cognitive dissonance? Well, it's a lot in one question. I think indeed that it is quintessential in these times to understand what I always refer to as the phenomenon of mass formation, which indeed leads up to a very strong cognitive dissonance. And like a mass formation, I won't describe it in detail, it's too much. But a mass formation is indeed a typical kind of group formation which leads to very specific characteristics. And one of them is that people, for one reason or another, become radically intolerant for dissonant voices. So that's cognitive dissonance. And one way or another, they just, become extremely intolerant and angry with everyone who goes against the narrative the masses believe in. And second, even more strange, is that they start to believe that these dissonant voices are completely irrational, or even a sign of madness. And it is because in the state of mass formation, the field of attention of people gets extremely narrow, and when trying to understand what happens in the world, they can only make use of this of the facts that appear in their very, very small field of attention, and that's why they start to become convinced of very simplistic narratives, and they become radically convinced that everyone who goes against it is irrational and even mad. And that's what happens in a mass formation. That's in a nutshell an explanation for this very strong cognitive dissonance that emerges in a society. Examples. Or why do the people will continue to believe in conspiracy theories? Yes, I would say it like this. As long as people don't see how mass phenomena and mass formation can organize an entire society, can make an entire society act in the same way, go towards the same goal, without very much intentional planning and explicit exchanges being made among the people, they will overestimate the importance of conspiracies as an explanation of what happens in society. Conspiracies have always existed in history, and they will always exist probably. But it's very, very often people overestimate the impact of conspiracies and the determining power of conspiracies. And indeed, as soon as you understand better how mass formation works, you see that conspiracies are far less important than you are inclined to believe. That's true. Is that an explanation or an answer to the question? Or
yes, but still one example.
One example of cognitive dissonance. There are experimental examples, of course, which show it very clearly. The experiment of Ash. I don't know if you know the experiment of Ash. Well, Ash showed people 3 lines, a very long, a shorter one, and then a very short one, and then he showed the 4th line, which was equally long as the short one, so everyone could see, even a child, that the 4th line was equally long as the 3rd line, and he asked people to answer the question which 2 lines are equally long, and the first 3 people that answered were collaborators of him, and they just said, well, line 1 and 4, which it was obviously not correct, and all the other people, or 75% of the other people, I think, gave the same wrong, absurd answer. So that's one experimental example of the phenomenon of cognitive dissonance. And one way or another, people can't see anymore information that is dissonant with their own view on man and the world if they are in the grip of groupthink. A much better known example is what happened, or a historical example, what happened during the Second World War, for instance, when Jewish people were also so much in the grip of the Nazi narrative that they went voluntarily on the train to the concentration camps. In one way or another, they were so blind for everything that went against the dominant narrative that they just stepped on the train and went to the concentration camps. And there were a small percentage of the Jewish people who were awake, let's say, and who saw what was happening. And they typically tried to warn their fellow the other Jewish people, and tell them, like, you won't step on that train. You're going to your concentration camps. It will mean you will be destroyed, and so on and so on. And strangely enough, usually people just got angry with them, and even also then, the Jewish people who, for one reason or another, were also in a mass formation, just answered the people who tried to wake them up, saying like, do you really believe in conspiracies? Do you really believe there are letters preserved of Jewish people who tried to warn the others, like, look, these trains are going through to a concentration camp and you will be killed there. And the answers to the letters are also preserved. You can also still read them. Hannah Arendt mentions a few in her famous book on the banality of evil. The other people typically reproached them that they were conspiracy theorists. So that's cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is extremely strong. As soon as your mind is really absorbed by a certain narrative, you're completely blind for all the rest.
I have one question.
Yes, wait, there is a second question here. I will first read it.
I thought you had it.
No. When I was reading the book The Psychology of Totalitarianism, I kept wondering if you believe in the benevolence of the technocrats, or if you believe that the world is run by a handful of bankers who print as much money as they need anyway and strictly follow the agenda they set for themselves. They set for themselves depopulation. So do you believe that there are eugenic villains in the world who are systematically creating COVID lockdowns, masks, climate crisis, with and also dumbing down children and making them good off, and at the same time not think for themselves? Take the first part first. When I was reading the book The Psychology of Totalitarianism, I kept wondering if you believe in the benevolence of technocrats. Yes, I do believe not in the benevolence. I do believe that almost all people involved, and definitely the really totalitarian people, the real totalitarian people, usually blindly believe in their own ideology, not in their own narratives. And so what they believe that the only solution to the problems we are facing now is the installation of a technocratic system. And these people do so. I know people who know Bill Gates personally, and I do believe them. I know Geert van den Bossen, for instance, who spent hours and hours talking with Bill Gates, and he says Bill Gates truly believes that he will save the world. So I really believe that. I really believe that's the psychology of totalitarian leaders or really totalitarian ideologists is rather megalomaniac than psychopathic. It's not really, many people think that totalitarian systems are led by psychopaths. A small percentage of them maybe is, but megalomania is much more typical for totalitarian leaders. It's the idea totalitarian leaders are always under the illusion that they need to create a new paradise for mankind. That's what Hitler thought, that's what Stalin thought, that was the communist thought, that was the fascist thought, and that's what Yuval Noah Harari thinks now, and that's what the people who are involved in this emerging totalitarianism typically think. We will create a new paradise, and because the paradise will be very beautiful, it doesn't matter whether we make a few million or even billion victims. That's what they typically think. Without us, the world will collapse, and with us, it will end up in a completely new paradise. I think that's usually the psychology of the public ideological leaders and ideologists. That doesn't mean, of course, that there are no bankers, as you mentioned here, who also play a role, and that role can be extremely powerful. I know the impact of the banking system, which is probably in the hands of a very small number of people, the people behind BlackRock and Vanguard and so on, is extremely big. But I can guarantee you, if the new totalitarianism really emerges, they will even kill these bankers. The bankers, and that was the case every time. I see and I know who, for instance, in Belgium, in my own country, and abroad, are the people who have the psychological profile of a real totalitarian leader. It are always fanatically blind ideologists who eventually, in the end, take the lead of in totalitarian systems. And no matter how important Pfizer was, and no matter how much Pfizer went for the money during the corona crisis, it will be ruined by the totalitarian leaders once they are in power. Totalitarianism is blind ideological conviction. And the farther it goes, the more it becomes blind ideological conviction, and the more everyone falls prey to it. That's also an extremely important difference with classical dictatorships. In a classical dictatorship, the dictatorial regime protects itself. And a totalitarian system, the ideological fanatic convictions are so strong that in the end the leaders start to kill each other if they think one of the other leaders is not loyal enough to the ideological rules of totalitarianism. Nobody is safe in a totalitarian system. In a totalitarian system, to use the words of Hannah Arendt, a totalitarian system in the end becomes always a monster that devours its own children. You see that with the Me Too woke culture. It attacks people who do not go along with woke, but equally well those who publicly buy into it. Oh yeah.
I have goosebumps.
Yeah.
I have one question.
Yeah.
Just back to the conspiracy. Don't you think that the word conspiracy is part of the propaganda?
Yes, to a certain extent, it's part of the propaganda. It's weaponized.
Yeah.
It emerged. It was weaponized after, as you know, after the GFK assassination. But before that, it was already a very powerful word. Like if you read the letters of which I referred to a few minutes ago of the Jewish people who refused to see what was happening during the Second World War, they often used the term conspiracy thinker. It has always been like a pejorative, I think, for a certain simplistic way or too reductionist way of looking at what happens in the world. And to a certain degree, that it is true. Trying to explain everything in terms of a conspiracy is really reductionist. It's much more complex than a conspiracy. What is going on?
Yeah, but I meant it also. You can put everybody that criticizes, even
Yes,
on
of course.
You can just put them in the same corner.
That happens all the time now.
Yeah.
That happens all the time. And the people who identify with the mainstream narrative typically use the term conspiracy theories to stigmatize everyone who doesn't go along with them, while at the same time, the mainstream narrative very often lapses into conspiracy theories. If Prigozhin is killed, everyone thinks that it is a conspiracy of Putin, and it might be true. But then it's not a problem to think in terms of conspiracy at the moment. And you can give 100 examples. But of course it's weaponized. Yes, it's.
Prav, hvala.
Okay, can I ask something more? What is the vision of future? Now new pandemics are coming, they are saying, and so how you see that?
The future.
What will be your vision now? Because you predict some things also before.
Yes.
Now.
I like this quote of Niels Bohr. Predicting is always difficult, and in particular if it is about the future. I don't know. I don't know exactly what will happen. What I do know is that this crisis and this totalitarianism will last exactly as long as it needs to last. Totalitarianism, if you take a little bit of distance, is a phenomenon with a certain purpose. Nature, or call it God, or no matter how you want to call it, would not have created the phenomenon of totalitarianism if it would have no purpose. It has a purpose. What happens now is that there is a large organism, mainstream society, who puts a lot of pressure on a small group of people who refuse to go along with the totalitarian tendencies in our society, and who are pushed on a different road, and who will go through a very fast process of evolution as a human being. And as such, they will start, or they will rediscover, I think, the elementary principles, ethical principles of humanity, which eventually will allow them to find an alternative for totalitarianism, and which will be a really humane society, which will be the historical continuation or the historical follow-up for our Enlightenment society now. That's what I think. It will last as long as it needs to last, and what will happen, if I would, my 2-cent word opinion is that in the years to come, it will get very difficult. The system, or like the global institutions will do whatever they can to impose their technocratic system. They will introduce the digital coins, I think. They will introduce the digital IDs. They will do their best, although I doubt whether that will work, to push 90% of the population in 5-minute cities and to convince them to buy an electric car which won't ride. So that's what I expect. But I'm also quite confident that there will be a certain percentage of the population which says no. No matter what happens, we don't go along with it. And the only thing this small part of the population has to do, well, it's very difficult. They have to really, no matter how inhumane society becomes, they have to stay loyal to ethical principles. That will be the most important thing, just to survive it psychologically. And the first of these ethical principles is the ethical principle, or is the living up to the duty we have as a human being to speak out. We should not be silent. History has shown us what happens if the people who resist the totalitarian system make the choice to go underground and to stop to speak out. Then the destruction campaigns start. Like 1930, this happened in the Soviet Union. The resistance stopped speaking out in public space. Within 6 months, the destruction campaign started. 1935, exactly the same as in Nazi Germany. Resistance stopped to speak out. Within 6 months, the destruction campaign started. That's just because totalitarianism is based on mass hypnosis. And if there is no dissonant voice anymore, the voice of the leaders, the propaganda, becomes so hypnotizing and so powerful that people start to become convinced that the totalitarian system, leaders and population start to become convinced that they have to eliminate each and everyone that doesn't go along with them. So that's what we have to avoid. You have to stay loyal to ethical principles, and the first one is the principle that you have to speak out in a sincere way. And if you do that, then I think we might not be able to predict concretely what will happen, but in the end, the totalitarian system will destroy itself, as they always do, before it destroys the people who do not go along with it. And that's one of the most important strategical and also ethical principles we have to follow in the nearby future. Refuse to go along with the system and continue to speak out.
Thank you, Mattias. Hvala vsem vam, ki ste prišli, zdaj pa je čas za individualne srečanja. A še?
Ja, smo še malo že čas.
Aha, dobro.
Še eno vprašanje.
Yeah.
Do you think that our politicians are corrupted or so dumb or crazy that they lead all politics to destroy the people who voted for them?
They are definitely crazy. No.
Or corrupt.
We are all a little bit crazy, but it's fair to say, I think, that political discourse is perverted and is corrupted. Like politicians, we even do not expect anymore that a politician will do what he promised during the election campaigns after he gets elected. So that's one of the most important indicators of a corrupted and perverted political discourse. I'm always very careful and hesitant to really accuse or label individual persons. I know many politicians who would want to do better and who know that what is going on is a process that will end up in a technocratic totalitarianism, but who just don't see a way, or at least don't have the courage to go against it. And they are responsible for that. They are responsible. We are all responsible. We all have to live up to the responsibility to speak out. But I do believe that a substantial part of the politicians actually regrets what is going on, but lacks the power and the courage to step up and speak out. And of course, a certain part of it really buys into the totalitarian narrative, really collaborates with the global institutions, their technocratic plans, and so on. But many of them would prefer not to do so, I think.
What's your what you can say to, for instance, Slovene people to do on the next elections? How to choose the right party or the right group for leading Slovene?
I would say them, no matter for whom you vote, it won't make a difference. As long as our basic view on man in the world doesn't change, no political party, even not a political party with the best plans and intentions, will be capable of bringing this fundamental change we need. The problem is not in the first place situated at the political level, it's in the first place situated at the cultural level. We are in the grip of this rationalist view on man in the world, and as long as we are in the grip of it, no matter what political party is elected, it won't be capable of bringing the change we need, just because there will be no support in the population for the changes they propose. That's the problem. The population wants leaders who continue to act according to this rationalist view of man in the world, I think. So, politicians can play a role in this, and the more sincerely they speak, they will contribute to creating this new awareness we need, but in themselves, on their own, they will not bring the change we need, I think. That would be my 2 cents worth opinion.
Hvala lepa in se vidimo.